Yeah, 59.
59.5.
With
That's the number I was
penalties.
looking for.
Or without penalties.
Without penalties?
Without
Okay, I
penalties.
thought it was 62 for some reason.
Yeah.
59.5.
Yeah, 59.5, that's the number I was looking for. At
Yeah.
59.5, you can start. So think about this. Ben, you're how old now?
31.
31, okay. So for the next 28, 29 years, you're depositing into the account. And that's a good thing because let's say you only put 10 grand a year, and every year you don't have to pay 40% tax on that money. And it grows, so at the end of the year, you have $300,000. Assume you don't make anything on it. The real power of the self-directed IRA is when you start not only putting it in there tax deferred, but then growing it tax deferred. And think about that, because let's say you didn't fund 10,000, but let's say you had a job and you were able to roll over 60 grand. Okay? And with that $60,000, you bought a house in Pike Township. Okay? And after paying taxes, and after paying insurance, and after paying management, you net on that house in Pike Township $8,000 a year. So in year one, you net $8,000. How much do you pay in tax?
Nothing.
Nothing.
That's a good thing.
That's a beautiful thing. Because if that house is just in Ben's name, and you make $8,000, then what do you pay in tax? John?
$2,400.
$2,400.
30% bracket.
Think about that.
Oh,
Okay? You gotta write out a check at the end of the year.
Rather than in the IRA.
Right.
Okay.
And a lot of people, it's really interesting because a lot of people don't get their mind around that. I think they said that the most genius government plan for taxation ever invented was withholdings. Because think about it, everyone just thinks these days in terms, especially W-2 employees, they think in terms of what's my net, what's my take home, right? Well, I know I make $10 an hour, but I know my take home's $750 every 2 weeks. I make $40,000 a year, but I know my take home. All their focus on the take home, right? And it's funny because I talk to groups all the time, and I say to people, "All right, how many of you received a refund check last year? Raise your hand." And how many of you were happy when you got the check? Raise your hand. Now think about that, because in 2 weeks ago I was in California. A lady raised her hand. She got a check this year for $15,000 was a refund check. And she's like, $15,000, and I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that, because I said, how much of that $15,000 was interest from the federal government? And she's like, oh, I'm not really sure. And I'm like, well, I mean, some other guy yelled out, none of it! I said, exactly. So wait a minute, so for the previous 12 months, you loaned the federal government $15,000 of the money that you earned. It's your money, your job, you earned it. And then they just gave it back to you.
And you're excited about it.
And you're excited about it. And we get tenants, right now this is probably our busiest time to rent houses this time of year. Why? Because people are getting their checks and they can afford the security deposit. Because so many people live month to month. And it's always ironic to me because people don't think about it in terms of that way. They think of it as, oh good, I'm getting money back from a check. They're like Pavlovian dogs. They've been conditioned to give that's not your money, that's the government's money, and my boss keeps that, and then I don't have to deal with it. I just get on my TurboTax and do my taxes, and that's my end of the year. They don't think that's my money, I can do with what I want, aka I can let that $8,000 keep building up every year, and then buy another house, and then, I mean, if you think about by not having to pay taxes on inside that IRA, what that can mean to your long-term wealth picture. Because then every penny that you earn is helping grow the base and helping you grow going forward.
What about when you do start withdrawing it? What's the tax rate?
John?
So whatever the rate is that you're paying at the time. And if you're not working, it's going to be considerably less than what your rate is now.
So if you're like collecting Social Security, you're
right. So Social Security is not taxed, so then you're going to be you might be in a 10% bracket, let's say, when you retire.
So think about if you knew that you had think about this. Let's say you knew that you could, once you got the money in the IRA, you could make 15-20% a year, like pretty guaranteed. Now, if you are self-employed,
Pretty
usually,
guaranteed.
what's that?
I'm sorry.
Pretty guaranteed, right? You're like day trading.
The
I
voice
can guarantee
the voice of experience,
18%, man, watch Channel 69.
We'll get to that because I've been averaging about 100% on mine. So let's say you felt pretty confident about that. Wouldn't it make sense then to not only put the maximum of tax deferred money, but to actually consider putting extra after tax money? Because if you can just get it in there, then you can grow it and not have to pay that 20 to 30% tax rate that you're paying. Because what that can do for your long-term picture. Because we see investors do that all the time. They're like, well, so if I do a SEP and I do a Roth and I do a traditional IRA, I can put 60 grand a year in there without paying taxes on it. Well, can I put extra money? And I've seen investors fund $200,000 in there just so they can then buy properties, and just off that rental income and the potential for appreciation, the return isn't the 10% that they're going to make. The return is really the 10% plus what they're not paying in taxes. Then it starts to kind of like mess with your head, because when you start to think about the power of tax deferred growth.
It's too much money.
Yeah. It's the opportunity cost, and in that case, it's the opportunity gain. And so, and I think that it's because we're not really taught about taxes when we're growing up. Your first job is usually an hourly job, and it's just my take home. And so, it's always interesting to me people to think about. Think about this. So I just finished my 2009 tax return. Okay.
Wait a minute.
I finished it about 6 months ago. Now, in 2009, I saved up $150,000 to pay taxes with, and it was sitting in just a checking account. So I went to the accountant in early 2010 and said, "Hey, I'm not ready yet. Can you file an extension?" He said, "Yeah, sure." So he filed an extension, and I was supposed to get some paperwork together for him, and I never got around to it. And so 6 months later, when he says, "Hey, man, we need to get that filed," I said, "Donald, I'm still not ready. Can you file another extension?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." Now, he was an auditor for IRS in Boise for 8 years. Okay, so this is somebody who knows, the ins and outs. All he did was audit people. And I said, "Let me ask you a question. Like, how long can I extend for?" And he's like, "Well, now you're paying penalties. You're paying, because you're going to owe. We're pretty sure that you're going to owe, so you're going to have to pay penalties on it." I said, "Well, how much is the penalty?" And he said, "Well, for the first year, it'll probably be about 10%. And I'm like, "All right, well, if I don't call it, what if instead of penalty, I just call it interest rate? And what if I go out and buy another round of houses with that 150 grand and flip it, and flip a couple deals and make 20 or 30%, but offset with the 10% that I got to pay in penalties / hard money loan," right? He's like, "Yeah, you could do that. There are people that trade on the money, hoping to get ahead on the return. That's it." I said, "Well, how long out could I go?" He's like, "A couple of years. You could go a couple of years. If you go on a 2-year stagger, especially if you're owing and then you're paying penalties, they're not going to come chase you because they figure you're just a dumbass who doesn't keep his books very well." So I did that, and I bought a bunch of flips, and in the 14 months after I did that, I was able to make about 40% on that money when it all came back in. So I had made an extra 60 grand on that 150. So when I had to pay the $18,000 in penalties, that was just an offset to my 60. And so if you think about it, so I said to that lady with the $15,000, I said, if you think about it, the $15,000 that you loaned the government, in essence, you were loaning it to me, because I hadn't paid my taxes yet. Right? So really, I should be thanking you for the free interest loan, not her. And I think that's the essence of, how people only think about earning more money. I need to get a second job because I need more money. Instead of, why don't I retain more money, aka pay less in taxes? Why don't I build my wealth by locking it down in an IRA? And I think those, it's like you've heard Warren Buffett lately say how he thinks that he pays too little in taxes. Have you heard him saying that?
Mm-hmm.
One of the richest men in the world saying that his effective tax rate is about 15%. His secretary pays 3 times the tax rate that he does, right?